You're just a little too old school for where we're headed. That was how Travis Mercer started the conversation. Not a hello, not a thank you, just that. I sat across from him, my hands folded on the edge of the desk I'd worked behind for 15 years. He was 36, fresh off a Silicon Valley crash and burn, and newly minted as the CEO of Meridian Manufacturing. Expensive sneakers, trim blazer, a smirk that thought it was a smile. "We need someone who can innovate," he said, stretching the word like it meant something revolutionary. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Understood." He blinked. He'd expected pushback. Maybe a wounded go, maybe tears. But I just looked at him like another quarterly report, something to process and close out. "We're announcing the CFO transition at the board meeting in 2 weeks," he added, watching me for cracks. None came. I'll lie. Have my office cleared by the end of the day. Travis leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Rick, I want this to be respectful, clean." "It already is." I stood up, extended a steady hand, and left the room without looking back. In the hallway, the walls felt colder than usual, polished, yes, but sterile, detached. I passed Bethany from accounting. She gave me a tight smile, then quickly looked away. She knew. They all did. Back in my office, I closed the door and looked around. Everything I had, 15 years, fit into a single cardboard box. A photo of Patricia from our last vacation. Commemorative coin from our IPO. My father's brass paperweight worn smooth from years of use. But the most important thing wasn't on the shelf. It was in the server logs, in the reports, in the pattern I'd started to notice 6 months ago. Placed the brass paperweight in the box last and paused, staring at the bookshelves one final time. Then I logged into a private admin panel on our financial system. One no one had asked to disable yet. They called me old school. They had no idea how sharp that edge could cut. While the company gathered in the auditorium for an all-hands meeting about our bold new direction, I stood alone in my office, carefully sliding 15 years of memories into a cardboard box. I didn't need to hear the pitch. I knew what Travis would say. Forward thinking, streamlined efficiency, future-ready leadership, words polished to a shine, but hollow inside. My nameplate came off the door with a quiet pop. Just plastic. I laid it on top of a few framed photographs. Patricia laughing on the ferry, a team lunch from the year we survived the second recession, a snapshot of Harold Phillips, our founder, shaking my hand after the IPO. That was a good or not. I left behind the furniture, the monitors, the wall of certifications. But I kept the leather-bound portfolio Patricia gave me on my first day. The initials RD were embossed on the cover. She used to joke it stood for reliable and dangerous. I suppose both were true. Before I shut down the computer, I opened one final program. Buried deep in our financial server was a legacy subsystem, one I'd designed during our last acquisition. A backup audit tool used only when we needed redundancy for high-risk transactions. Quiet, invisible, still active. Most people didn't even remember it existed. Travis certainly didn't. With 3 keystrokes, I activated the mirror protocol. From now on, every transaction over $50,000 would be duplicated and stored separately, undetectable unless you knew exactly where to look. I closed the window and wiped the login. Then I turned off the lights. My box in one hand, the leather portfolio under my arm, I stepped out into the corridor. No fanfare, no applause. Just a few familiar nods from those who knew better than to ask questions. They thought I was walking away. They didn't realize I was walking ahead. It started with an invoice, $72,400 billed to Vertex Solutions for digital transformation, strategy consulting. The name didn't ring any bells, and the services were vaguely worded: ecosystem optimization, capital visioning, corporate nonsense. I asked procurement who authorized it. No one had a clear answer, just a signature from the new chief innovation officer, a guy Travis brought in from his last venture. That was 3 weeks after Travis became CEO. I flagged it in our internal notes, not as a red alert, just something to monitor. But once I started looking, the pattern grew clearer. A $49 $800 charge to a design firm no one in marketing had worked with. Then a $66 $200 budget reallocation from R&D to external advisory. No accompanying report, no deliverables, just a cleared payment and a line item in the ledger. And then came Zachary Hughes. Travis introduced him as our financial future, 29, fresh from a TEDx stage and dripping with startup buzzwords. I watched the board eat it up, nodding along to a guy who believed cash flow modeling was restrictive thinking. Zachary didn't speak to me once during his first week. Not out. Disrespect. He simply didn't care. After he arrived, the entries tripled. Vendors I couldn't trace. Service categories with no internal references. Expenditures split across departments in ways that made trend analysis difficult. The sloppiness didn't bother me. What bothered me was the consistency. Every time I found a hole, it was padded, with jargon and buried under executive summary reports. Someone had a plan. I didn't confront anyone, not yet. I just created a private ledger, a place to track each irregularity, date it, and cross-reference it with who approved what. Patricia used to say, "Rick, your gift is seeing the lie behind the balance." She was right. The books weren't broken, but they were bent. Bent. Enough that if someone didn't know where to look, they'd miss the fracture entirely. But I saw it, and I knew where it would lead. The leather was cracked along the spine, soft from years of handling. Patricia gave it to me for my 50th birthday, dark brown, understated, with my initials pressed into the corner. She called it my ledger of truth. I never told her how much I relied on it. That night, I placed it on the dining room table and undid the clasp. Inside, I kept hard copies, printed invoices, transaction receipts, redacted internal memos. I still believed in digital backups, but paper never forgets. You can't overwrite it, not with a patch or a system update. I laid them out like puzzle pieces. There was the Vertex invoice again, still suspicious. Below it, a consulting agreement with a firm called Cora Dynamics. I'd never heard of them. No website, no LinkedIn presence. Yet they'd billed us 6 figures for strategic pipeline advising. But it was the third folder that stopped me cold. Alpine Innovations, LLC. The name had appeared twice in our vendor master file. Just once in each of the last 2 months. Small amounts, discreet. But what drew my attention wasn't the amount. It was the registration date, 3 days before Travis Mercer had officially been named CEO. That wasn't coincidence. That was preparation. I cross-referenced the Shell's address, a WeWork suite in Chicago, one of those buildings where hundreds of businesses exist but none of them operate. I'd seen the setup before: create a clean shell, funnel money through layered entities, label it as restructuring or advisory support, and if no one's watching, if no one's old school enough to track the paper trail, it slides through unnoticed. I looked over at Patricia's photo, still perched on the mantel. She'd always believed my work mattered, even when the board treated me like a calculator in a suit. Her trust was the only recognition I ever really needed. I placed a post-it on Alpine's file. Trace backwards. Start there. The story was unfolding. I wasn't ready to speak it out loud, but I was. Ready to listen to the numbers. I waited 2 days before calling William Foster. I told myself it was to gather more evidence, to tighten the threads. But the truth is, I hesitated because some part of me still believed he might do the right thing. William was the one who'd personally called me in 2008. "We need someone who can keep this place honest," he'd said back then. His voice had weight, and his handshake was firm. He was Meridian's spine, at least he used to be. His assistant picked up on the second ring. "Rick Donnelly," I said, keeping my tone easy. Just hoping to speak with William about some loose ends. Before I formally exit, she transferred me without hesitation. He answered in a voice that sounded older than I remembered. "Rick, good to hear from you. We talked pleasantries for a minute. His golf game, my plans for retirement, the weather in Cincinnati." Then I cut in. I noticed a pattern in some recent vendor filings. Nothing I'm formally flagging, but it concerns me. Thought I'd loop you in unofficially. There was a pause, then a subtle shift in tone. Travis mentioned you might reach out, William said. Said you were struggling with the transition. That's not how I'd describe it, I replied. I'm talking about activity that predates Zachary Hughes's arrival. Another pause. Rick, he said finally, you've served this company well, but we're in a new era. Travis has the board's confidence. It's time to let go. His words were polished, but there was something underneath. Not irritation, not dismissal. Fear. Are you saying I should drop this? I asked, letting the question hang. I'm saying the board has moved forward. You should too. He ended the call with a hollow promise about meeting at the holiday party. I stared at the phone for a long time. William wasn't just uninformed. He was compromised. I'd been hoping for an ally. What I found was another layer of insulation protecting the rot. The message was clear. Whatever I planned to do, I'd be doing it alone. We met at a diner just off the interstate, one of those places where the coffee's weak but the booths are deep, and the windows fog with breath and time. Kevin showed up 10 minutes late, glancing around like he expected to see someone watching. He slid into the seat across from me, stiff, guarded. Not the same Kevin who used to stay late running cross-checks with me during quarterly reviews. They promoted me, he said before I could even ask. New title, bigger paycheck. I'm reporting directly to Zachary now. I nodded, neutral. Congratulations. He didn't smile. Rick, they're changing everything. New software, new protocols. Half the checks and balances are gone or automated. Zachary says it's leaner, smarter, but it's hollow. Still running internal audits, I asked. He hesitated. Kind of, but it's curated now. What we see, how we see it. Zachary controls the lens. And he nodded slowly. They're calling them continuity agreements. Basically, I can't speak about anything I see. Not without legal risk. I stirred my coffee. They're rewriting the rules. They're rewriting you, Rick, he said quietly. Word. Going around is you resisted modernization. That your last 2 quarterly reports had errors Zachary had to fix. Some are saying ethical concerns. Didn't flinch, but my stomach dropped like a ledger line falling through a balance sheet. I didn't expect you to believe it, I said. I don't, Kevin replied, but others will. And if I talk, I've got a mortgage. Twins about. To start college, I can't risk it. I understood, I really did. Take care of your family, Kevin. He dropped cash on the table and left without looking back. I sat alone, watching the gray sky press against the window. They weren't just erasing my role. They were replacing it with a narrative that served them, one whisper at a time. I was no longer a threat in the boardroom. I was becoming a ghost. They thought I was gone, out of sight, out of relevance. But what they didn't realize was that during my final week, while I was graciously transitioning out, I left myself a backdoor, standard protocol for system shifts, emergency admin credential tucked inside the legacy audit server, masked beneath layers of outdated user logs no one bothered to scrub. I logged in just after midnight. The system still pulsed like an old heartbeat, quiet and faithful. Familiar. Code scrolled across the screen, directories I knew better than the floor plan of my own house. I began pulling threads, cross-referencing procurement chains, triangulating service contracts, and slowly, painfully, the picture clarified. Alpine. Innovations wasn't a fluke. It was the center node of a rot. From it branched a dense web of shell vendors. Velocity Partners, Grayspan Group, Radial 5. Each name sterile, forgettable. Each tied to vague consulting fees and technology transformation invoices. None listed deliverables. None. Held physical addresses that stood up to verification. Over $12 million siphoned in 17 months. Disguised as growth initiatives. Hidden behind buzzwords. Launched shortly after a new venture capital firm gained 3 seats on Meridian's board, including one held by Jacob Foster, nephew of William. I traced funding trails backward. That same VC firm had bankrolled Travis's last company, the Silicon Valley startup that flared bright and died fast. And Zachary? His name appeared in the original incorporation paperwork for one of the vendor shells, quietly removed before his hiring, but still buried in a digital echo if you knew where to look. This wasn't mismanagement. This was coordinated theft. They hadn't hired innovation. They'd installed extraction, installed it under the guise of progress, and paved over anyone who still believed in balance sheets that, well, actually balanced. By dawn, I had everything mirrored and encrypted. 3 drives, multiple backups, all time-stamped, indexed, and preserved. They'd mistaken my silence for surrender. But I wasn't quiet because I was broken. I was quiet because I was watching. I called Bethany the next morning. Kept it simple. Coffee? She agreed. No questions. We met at a quiet cafe outside the business park, the kind of place that still had paper menus and no online presence. She looked older than I remembered, exhausted, professionally polished, but carrying tension in her shoulders, like armor. She didn't waste time. "They're gutting us," she said. "Zachary's calling it consolidation, but it's a purge." Her voice dropped lower. "I got a reassignment notice yesterday, lateral move, 6-week review. If I don't align, I'm out." I nodded, unsurprised. That audit protocol we built after the Jackson acquisition auto-duplicates every transaction over 50 grand. "Is it still active?" She blinked, caught off guard, then nodded slowly. "It should be. It's hard-coded. Compliance insisted after the overseas invoice incident. Why? Because those duplicate logs are still being archived off-site. Iron. Mountain receives them monthly. October's should have shipped last week." Bethany sat back, absorbing that. "So even if they've been rewriting local records, the originals still exist, immutably, off-network, off-schedule, out of reach." She exhaled, a quiet sound of stunned realization. "They don't know that." I reached into my coat and slid a sealed envelope across the table. Her fingers hovered before taking it. Inside is a formal whistleblower letter. It references transactions you'd naturally be exposed to. It names no one, doesn't accuse, just raises concern. Her expression turned wary. "If you submit this to internal audit," I continued, "it triggers mandatory review. They can't retaliate without invoking whistleblower protections." Bethany looked down at the envelope, then up at me. "This is why they're pushing me out?" "Probably." She held the envelope tighter. "If I do this, I want it to mean something." "It will," I said. "But only if you file it tomorrow." Bethany nodded once. The kind of nod you make when a line's been crossed and you're done pretending it hasn't. We stood and left, separately. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. The fuse was lit. Bethany submitted the letter at 9:02 a.m. sharp. She timed it to land with the internal audit lead just before their weekly compliance sync. At 9:05, the automated timestamp confirmed it was received, logged, and escalated. She sent me no message. She didn't need to. At 9:15, the first of my emails reached its target, Elaine Morrison, Audit Committee Chair. Her copy included an executive summary, just enough to raise every red flag she'd been trained to respond to. At 9:17, David Patel opened his version, tailored with pension exposure analysis. At 9:20, Anthony Wilson's assistant confirmed receipt. The subject line was simple: Concerns re. Alpine Innovations, time sensitive. I didn't send the SIG full evidence. Not yet. Just patterns, highlights, enough to make any fiduciary pause. By noon, the audit committee had called an unscheduled session. By 3 p.m., external counsel was looped in. Forensic auditors were contracted overnight. Bethany texted me one line at 6:23 p.m. "They're rattled." By morning, the entire executive floor was locked down for review. Access credentials were frozen. Internal communications paused for audit compliance. Travis didn't even make it to his office. Security redirected him to a separate conference room. Zachary followed an hour later, pale, sweating. By day's end, 4 senior individuals were placed on administrative leave: Travis Mercer, Zachary Hughes, and 2 board members with financial oversight authority. All pending internal review. The statement read, I stayed quiet, turned off my phone, walked the Ohio River path Patricia used to love. I'd told no one but Bethany what was coming, not because I didn't trust my evidence, but because I trusted the process. Numbers don't lie. They just wait patiently until someone finally listens. That evening, my old colleague Kevin sent me a single message through Signal. There, scrambling, you did it. No, I thought we did. The call came at 7:12 the next morning. The number flashed across my screen. William Foster. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice was low, like a man who had slept badly or not at all. Rick, he said, pausing, I owe you an apology. I didn't speak. I waited. There was a special board meeting last night. Elaine chaired it. Travis and Zachary, they've been suspended pending the audit findings. We've placed outside counsel on full review. Still, I said nothing. I should have seen it, he continued. Should have asked more questions. You tried to warn me. I did, I said quietly. There was a long exhale on the other end. The line. We need help, Rick. Elaine wants to bring you back, not as CFO. We've tainted that chair for now, but as a transition advisor, a stabilizer. You'd have full authority over finance during the audit, temporary, of course, but highly visible. High impact. I looked out at the river from my porch, watching the slow roll of mist across the surface. He waited. He was used to being in control. But this time he needed something from me. No, I said, Rick, I appreciate the call and the honesty, but I think Meridian needs someone who speaks the language of modern finance. I kept my tone neutral. Steady. Someone who can innovate. There was silence on the other end, then a quiet, hoarse chuckle. Touché. I'll cooperate with the forensic team, I added. Quietly, thoroughly, but I won't step back into that building. Understood. He didn't offer a goodbye, just hung up. I sat for a while after that, then poured 1 finger of bourbon, opened the leather portfolio Patricia gave me years ago, and quietly exhaled. Not in victory, just release. The drive to Asheville took 9 hours. I didn't rush it. Took the back roads when I could, watched the hills rise into mountains. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway of the cabin, the sky was fading into that particular shade of Carolina blue Patricia used to love. The cabin wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, 1 converted into an office, a covered porch with a swing, just enough land for quiet. The kind of place we talked about in the hospital when dreams became smaller and more sacred. We'll trade in boardrooms for birdsong, she'd said, smiling through fatigue. It took me a week to settle in. I didn't bring much, just the essentials. My books, the leather portfolio, the last photo of Patricia and me from the lake house. I framed it and placed it by the window where the morning light hits just right. I'd promised myself I wouldn't rot. I wasn't built for idleness. So when I heard the local nonprofit, a literacy initiative for under-resourced schools, needed help organizing their finances, I reached out. 2 interviews later, I became their quiet accountant. No title, no pressure, just clean books and honest math. It's not glamorous. I balance donations, monitor grant cycles, make sure the right numbers match the mission. But for the first time in years, the work feels true, not buried under layers of jargon and performance reviews, just useful. Most days I finish by 4. Then I take the trail behind the cabin up to the ridge, where you can see all the way to Mount Pisgah on a clear day. I sit there until the sun folds itself into the peaks, and I remember what stillness used to feel like. There's no plaque with my name on it, no press release, no LinkedIn announcement. Just a man in his 60s doing honest work in a quiet place. Some would say I walked away from power, from prestige. But I know better. I walked toward peace. It's been 6 months since the audit detonated. Meridian's stock has stabilized, surprisingly. The new CEO, a woman named Eliza Monroe, formerly of the pension board, seems competent. They've started rebuilding, stripping away the buzzwords and getting back to basics. I don't keep close tabs, but I hear things through Bethany and a few others who stayed. The final forensic report showed over $18 million in siphoned value, routed through a lattice of shell vendors and fictitious deliverables. Travis and Zachary both took plea deals. A few board members resigned quietly, some citing health, others new opportunities. The headlines were brief. Cleanups rarely make good copy. No one mentioned my name publicly. Not once, and I didn't ask them to. That's the thing about legacy. If you chase it loud, it runs from you. But if you build it right, clean, quiet, honest, it holds. Most mornings, I still wake early, make a full pot of coffee, and read the financial papers out on the porch. I highlight patterns, not headlines. I mark the way the world's speeding up, not always forward, just faster. Flashier. Markets chasing stories instead of signals. Leaders replacing wisdom with momentum. And somewhere in that rush, someone decided people like me were a liability. Too old school. What they meant was I couldn't be bought. That I wouldn't bury a transaction because someone called it agile. That I still asked for receipts. The truth is they were right, just not in the way they thought. I'm not built for quarterly pivots dressed in buzzwords. I don't believe that exponential growth comes without cost. And I'll never buy the idea that ethics should adapt with the market. So yes, I'm old school. I believe in double-checking the numbers, in shaking the vendor's hand, in knowing where the money goes and why. I believe in answering hard questions without deflecting to PowerPoint. I believe that good companies are like good marriages, not perfect but honest, accountable, built to last, and I believe in keeping promises, especially the ones you make when no one's watching. Tonight I sat on the porch and opened the leather portfolio Patricia gave me before my first day at Meridian, the same one I used to carry my notes into every audit, every board meeting, every late-night number review. Inside was the last photo we took at the lake. She was barefoot, laughing, sun in her hair. I looked at that picture a long time. Not with sadness, but with certainty. She knew what mattered, and so did I. They called me old school. I called it integrity.